CEO accidentally learns janitor speaks 7+ languages, instantly changes her life. Each Monday morning, the glass tower of Hallberg International glowed like a lighthouse of capitalism, bright, clean, and humming with purpose. It loomed against the skyline like a temple to ambition, reflecting the sun off its countless windows and radiating the energy of people who believed they were shaping the future. Inside, the air buzzed with the rhythm of productivity. Polished leather shoes tapped swiftly across marble floors. Laptops hummed as budget reports lit up their screens. Heads bent low over screens, mouths murmur into headsets, eyes narrowed at graphs projected in real time. Every motion was a dance of drive and control. And beneath it all, nearly drowned out by the clatter of keyboards and the chirp of elevator chimes, was a quieter rhythm. The faint swish of a mop gliding across tile. The subtle roll of plastic wheels from a janitor's cart pressing gently against the grout lines. The unsung cadence of the building's invisible hands. Among those hands was Denise Atwater. She arrived at 5 a.m., long before the first espresso was brewed or the executive parking garage filled. Wrapped in a plain blue uniform, hair pulled into a tight bun, she moved like clockwork. Her mop dipped and turned through the same stretches of hallway she had cleaned for over a decade. She worked with the silence of someone who had learned to fold herself into the background. If anyone passed by, she gave a polite nod but rarely spoke. Most didn't speak to her anyway. She was simply part of the scenery. The woman with the mop, the cleaning lady, the one who emptied the bins and vanished before the sun rose too high. 13 years. That's how long she had worked here. 13 years of polishing the glass doors to conference rooms where million-dollar strategies were drawn up. Of cleaning up the crumbs from catered breakfasts she was never offered. Of slipping through corridors and lounges without leaving a trace. Some called her the janitor. A few, the kinder ones, offered her a thin smile. But no one asked her name. No one knew that at night, when the building emptied out and the lights dimmed to a quiet hush, she stayed behind in the break room. She would prop up her aging phone on an overturned lunch container, plug in her earphones, and immerse herself in lessons, Portuguese phrases, French dialogues, German sentence structures, one language after another. They didn't know that before life collapsed on her, she had once been a star student in the Department of Linguistics at Texas State University. That she had dreams as intricate as any corporate blueprint, dreams of studying ancient dialects, traveling to remote villages, documenting the last whispers of dying tongues. Her heart had been set on preserving voices, cultures, stories that would otherwise vanish without a trace. But dreams have little say when the world collapses around them. Her father had died suddenly, crushed beneath the weight of a collapsed rig while working overtime. Her mother's stroke came a month later, reducing her vibrant spirit to a motionless shell that required constant care. And there was her son, just 5 at the time, asking her why grandma couldn't speak anymore and why daddy was always up in the sky. With no savings and hospital bills stacking like bricks around her chest, Denise did what she had to. She took the first job that would pay weekly. And she never stopped. The world never asked about her dreams. It only asked one question: how will you pay the bills this week? And so she cleaned. Not just dust and grime, but the memory of her old life. The brilliance in her eyes dimmed over the years, though it never completely vanished. Each night she studied. Each night she whispered words from other countries into the dim silence of the break room. She studied like a woman clinging to a raft, not knowing if the ocean would ever end. That morning began like any other. Denise was on the 17th floor, wiping down the glass windows of the executive boardroom. Her arms moved with the muscle memory of habit. Inside, through the glass, high-level meeting was already underway. Senior managers, all in sharp suits and sharper expressions, surrounded a long mahogany table. A man from the Chinese branch of the company was trying to explain a proposal, but his English was hesitant. He stumbled over phrases, pausing frequently, his face tightening in frustration. Some of the executives exchanged glances. Others fidgeted. The flow of the meeting faltered. Denise paused, not from curiosity, but from something deeper. A quiet love she had carried for years. The sound of language. Even fragmented, even mispronounced, she found something beautiful in the effort. She listened closely, her mind automatically parsing the structure, recognizing tonal patterns. And then, with the most natural impulse, almost like breathing, she softly murmured in Mandarin, translating the man's words under her breath. Her voice was clear, precise, without hesitation. She translated with respect, as though offering dignity to a stranger struggling to be understood. That's when she heard the voice. Who just said that? The words sliced through the silence like a whip. She turned around slowly, heart seizing in her chest. Standing just behind her was a man with silver hair and a presence that felt heavier than the air around him. His tailored suit was immaculate. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, now wide with something between disbelief and fascination. It was Jonathan Kellerman, CEO of Hallberg International. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He only looked at her, really looked at her, as though for the first time he was seeing a person who had been hidden in plain sight for years. And then his voice dropped lower, quieter. There was no command in it, only curiosity. Maybe even something close to respect. Would you mind coming up to my office for a moment? Denise stood frozen for a heartbeat, her hand still resting on the handle of the mop. The world, usually so indifferent to her presence, had suddenly shifted. Everything she had kept hidden, the languages, the dreams, the years of silent effort, hung now in the air between them. She nodded. And in that simple gesture, the hallway, the marble floors, the gleaming glass, it all felt different. Not brighter, but seen. For the first time, Denise Atwater stepped not into a room, but into the beginning of a story long overdue. The walls of the executive office on the 23rd floor were glass, allowing the Houston skyline to stretch infinitely beyond the horizon. The room smelled faintly of cedar polish and a quiet echo of power. Denise sat upright in a black leather chair that cradled her like it had countless CEOs and investors before her. The cushion was firm, the armrests smooth. She had cleaned this room dozens of times. She knew every speck of dust it used to hide. But this was the first time she'd seen the city from this height while sitting down. Her hands trembled in her lap, her eyes scanning the patterns of light flickering through the blinds. Across from her sat the man whose voice usually came through thick doors or distant intercom announcements. Jonathan Kellerman, president and CEO of Hallberg International, was watching her. Not with the distant glance of a superior who had just discovered an amusing anecdote, but with the sharp and focused curiosity of someone trying to fit together a puzzle that had been sitting under his nose for years. He leaned slightly forward, resting his hands on the glass desk that separated them. His voice was low, curious. "Did you just speak Mandarin?" Denise nodded slowly. The stillness of her body was only betrayed by the subtle twitch in her fingers. "Do you speak any other languages?" She hesitated. Then her voice came out, almost apologetic. "Spanish, French, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Swahili, Latin. I can also read Italian." She listed them like items from a forgotten inventory, things gathered over years of silence. Her voice remained soft, as if ashamed of how easily it all rolled out. Kellerman blinked once. A flicker passed over his face, something between disbelief and wonder, but he didn't speak. Not right away. It was not that he doubted her. It was that he could not understand how someone like her, someone he had walked past countless times without a second thought, could carry within her a treasure so vast and so precise. For a moment he studied her, as if her presence had somehow changed under the light, as though she had been someone else all along, and he was only now seeing clearly. "Tell me your story," he said quietly. Denise looked down. She didn't sigh. She didn't dramatize it. She simply began, and her words flowed like a calm river finding its way around rocks and roots. She told him about Texas State University, where she once sat in classrooms with dreams larger than any building in Houston. She had been a top student in the Department of Linguistics, fascinated by ancient dialects, by the whispers of dead languages, and the rhythmic breath of those still fighting for survival. Her plan had been simple: graduate, earn a doctorate, travel the world preserving tongues that were dying out faster than anyone could document them. But then the phone call came. Her father had died at a construction site, crushed beneath a faulty scaffold. The compensation had been meager. Her mother had a stroke not 6 months later. Then came the hospital bills, the mortgage, the needs of a 6-year-old daughter who cried herself to sleep missing a grandfather she barely remembered. So she paused her studies. And then she stopped them altogether. She waited tables, folded clothes, worked night shifts in warehouses. Eventually, she found a custodial job at Hallberg. It offered just enough stability to keep a roof overhead and food in the fridge. Throughout all those years, there was only one thing she refused to give up: her love of language. Every night, after her daughter fell asleep, she opened her second-hand phone and listened to podcasts in German, repeated phrases in Portuguese, mimicked tonal variations in Swahili. She wrote down verb charts on napkins. She read Latin texts on her lunch break. And slowly, piece by piece, she built back the only part of herself that the world could not take from her. Language, she said softly, is the only thing I could keep collecting without anyone noticing and without anyone being able to take it from me. Kellerman said nothing for a while. He looked out the window as if searching the skyline for answers. Perhaps he was trying to remember how many times he had seen her mop these floors without seeing her at all. Perhaps he was wondering how many others had gifts buried beneath uniforms and name tags. Or maybe he was simply stunned. Later that afternoon, Ripple passed through the upper levels of Hallberg. The CEO himself was assembling a meeting with international partners from Brazil. What shocked everyone more was the addition of an unfamiliar name on the calendar invite, Denise Atwater. She arrived at the meeting in the same blue uniform. She had not had time to change. Her badge still read facilities. Some eyebrows raised. Some eyes narrowed. One executive even whispered behind a coffee cup. But when the first Brazilian delegate spoke and Denise responded in flawless Portuguese, the air shifted. Her voice was not just accurate. It carried the tone, the rhythm, the warmth of someone who understood not just the grammar, but the spirit of the language. She laughed gently when appropriate. She nodded when they struggled to find the right idiom. She translated not only the words, but the intentions behind them. For the first time in that polished boardroom, people leaned forward not to interrupt, but to listen. The Brazilians smiled. One of them, a tall man in a navy suit with a hint of silver in his beard, turned to Kellerman with open admiration in his voice. She is the most brilliant interpreter we have ever worked with. Kellerman didn't reply immediately. He only looked at Denise, and this time not with curiosity, but with recognition. He saw not the janitor who walked these halls before sunrise, but the woman who had mastered the art of listening to a world that had long stopped listening to her. When the meeting ended, there was no applause. There were no handshakes beyond the formal ones. But there was silence, the thick kind that lingers after something meaningful has just occurred. People left the room with slower steps. Some looked back. A few avoided her gaze. She remained behind for a moment, hands folded neatly in front of her, unsure what to do next. No one had given her instructions. No one had told her what role she played now. Outside the room, the same hallway stretched toward the elevators. The marble floors gleamed. The lights shone down without flickering. And for the first time in 13 years, as Denise walked down that corridor, people stepped aside not because she was pushing a mop, but because they had finally noticed she was there. The train hummed steadily beneath her feet as the city slipped by like a moving canvas of lights and blurred lives. Denise sat by the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She looked down at her hands. The skin was rough, fingertips hardened by years of scrubbing tile floors and pushing heavy mop buckets through silent corridors. There were still faint traces of cleaning solution embedded in her cuticles, and the scent of industrial soap clung to her like a shadow. Yet tonight, those same hands had turned a quiet page of her life. She had not just spoken in a room where she had once been invisible. She had been heard, seen, recognized. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the train settle her thoughts. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, and in truth, she had never lived with the certainty of tomorrow. But for the first time in years, she felt like her existence no longer passed unnoticed. For so long, she had moved in the background, blending into walls, stepping aside so others could pass, smiling softly as elevators closed without waiting. But now someone had paused. Someone had truly looked. Across the city, another figure sat in the back seat of a black car, staring out a tinted window. The lights of Houston shimmered like stars fallen to earth. The man usually spent these rides reviewing reports on his phone, tapping responses to emails from directors, outlining strategic priorities. But tonight, the screen lay untouched beside him. His mind wandered back to that quiet voice in the boardroom, the way she had carried a conversation in Portuguese with such natural grace that even the guests had paused in astonishment. He had spent years in meetings discussing talent acquisition, debating initiatives on workplace diversity, pouring millions into consultants and recruitment strategies aimed at finding exceptional people. Yet the most extraordinary person in his building had been walking those halls for over a decade, her story wrapped in a janitor's uniform, her brilliance masked by assumptions no one dared to question. It was not just that she knew languages, it was that she had taught herself, with no institutional support, no degree, no one cheering her on. She had learned in silence, surrounded by fluorescent lights and the bitter sting of bleach. He saw her clearly now, not as a name on a timesheet, but as a symbol of something larger. A quiet challenge to everything the company claimed to value, and a living reminder of what had been overlooked. The next morning began like any other. Employees filtered into the sleek glass tower with coffee in hand and eyes fixed on devices. But something felt different. A quiet buzz ran through the elevator rides and hallway conversations. It was not about a product launch or market shift. It was about her. The janitor. The polyglot. The woman who had stood in a conference room and changed the way they saw everything. At 10 o'clock, an email appeared in every inbox. It was from the top office. The subject line was simple. Appointment announcement. And the content was shorter than anyone expected. Effective immediately, Denise will serve as assistant for language and cultural affairs. She will also lead the internal language and cultural literacy program launching this quarter. That was all it said. No long justification. No backstory. Just a statement of truth. When she walked into the building that morning, wearing a white blouse and modest skirt, people turned. Not in confusion. Not with the awkward surprise of someone seeing a stranger in a familiar place, but with respect. Recognition. Her eyes remained humble, her steps steady. She did not stride. She did not bask in the attention. She simply walked like she always had, quietly, purposefully, but now with the light behind her instead of always in front. In the break room, someone approached her. "Thank you for yesterday." "I mean it." She offered a small smile. "I didn't do anything special." But from the far end of the hallway, a voice answered before the employee could respond. "That is where you are wrong." He stood there with a calm gaze. "You reminded us that value is not tied to a title, is not found in polished resumes or fancy offices. Sometimes the most valuable person in the building is the one you pass every day without really seeing." There was no applause, no grand speech, just a stillness that settled over the room, as if the very walls were holding their breath. People looked at one another and then at her, and for the first time in their working lives, they understood something simple and profound. Not all brilliance announces itself with noise. Some shines through silence. Some waits patiently in the dust and fluorescent light. Over the weeks that followed, her presence changed the rhythm of the office. She created a weekly lunchtime language table where employees could practice Portuguese or French over coffee. She added cultural notes to translation documents that prevented more than one potential misunderstanding with international clients. She moved through the halls still quietly, but now when she passed, people smiled. Not the empty kind, not the courtesy nod, but the kind that says they see her, that they know her story, that they know her name. One afternoon, while cleaning out her locker, yes, she still kept it, out of respect for the years it served her, she found a small notebook tucked between old gloves and spare socks. It was filled with phrases in Arabic she had written during breaks, alongside Latin quotes and idioms in Swahili. On the inside cover was a single line, written long ago in faded ink. "No one notices a whisper in a storm, so I will keep whispering until the storm quiets." She smiled. She folded the notebook, slipped it into her purse, and closed the locker door. She had never needed recognition to be who she was. But now that the storm had quieted, her whisper had finally been heard. And in that moment, walking through a hallway she had once scrubbed on her knees, the sunlight spilling through the tall windows like applause, Denise understood something deeper than words. The miracle had never been being seen. The miracle was never letting herself disappear. Not in fatigue, not in silence, not in the blur of ordinary days. She had held on to dignity, to learning, to the quiet light within. And now, the world saw her shine, as she had always been, a gem hidden in the dust, waiting for the day someone would finally look close enough to see. And now they had, and nothing would ever be the same again. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful, emotional narratives that inspire and open hearts, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. We release new stories every week, each one crafted to move you, make you think, and bring light to untold voices. Like, comment, and share if this touched you in any way. Thank you for being part of our journey. We're just getting started.